The base shield is down. We're beginning our attack. Did Skywalker make that shot? That was me. Nah, I thought I was the best.
Star Wars Rogue Squadron. It's an excellent, I hesitate to use the word, flight sim on the N64 that allows you to get behind the flight stick of your favorite Star Wars ships, including quite famously the X-Wing. It's the ship that killed the Death Star. Quad turrets, R2 units, good all-round ship, but move aside X-Wing, I'm taking the Interceptor. High speed, high maneuverability, 4 wing-tipped lasers, and no shield. Flying like a man. Relying only on your ability to fly, rather than your shields and your stupid little gimpy droid. Now the story to Star Wars Rogue Squadron follows the titular, quite illustrious Rogue Squadron, led by Luke Skywalker up until halfway through the Battle of Hoth, where he got shot down and was replaced by the legendary Wedge Antilles. Although you can only play as Wedge in one level, which kinda sucks. The story itself is compounded through several chapters, and it really feels like each individual mission that you're on helps bring about the victory over the Empire, because one mission leads to information about another mission, which leads to another, and so on and so forth. It actually feels like your actions are helping to overthrow the good guys. Way to go, you rebel terrorists. I'm sorry. You can take me out of the TIE Fighter, but you can't take the TIE Fighter out of me. But if that wasn't enough story for you, they even give you background biography files on each member of Rogue Group. Weirdly enough, with the exception of Luke Skywalker. I guess they just sort of assume you already know who he is, and if you don't, let me speed you up. Luke Skywalker was a badass, end of story. Overall, the story works quite well, with one singular exception. The last level takes place 6 years after the end of the 6th movie, and it's the one level that stars Wedge. It has him flying up against the threat of a new empire headed by a shadowy organization. And then you win, and then it's over. But it's like, really? It's over? There's a whole new threat out there. We haven't done anything yet. It just sort of dropped the ball at the end, and while I know it doesn't really matter anymore because Disney, I want to see how that story ends, damn it. Now, the gameplay itself is a ton of fun. There's a great amount of variance here. You've got stealth missions, offensive missions, defensive missions, which I hate for so many reasons, but they all work really well. Although this game does tend to spike in difficulty at places, starting with level 4 where, after 4 levels, with barely any flight training under your belt at this point, they ask you to trip 2 AT-AT walkers while defending 2 locations. It's a bit much to handle that early on, I think. I mean, as a kid, that mission was like the bane of my existence. Oh, and don't even get me started on Escape from Fest, where you have to protect a bunch of AT-PTs. Come on, guys. You had AT-ATs. Don't tell me you didn't. There was 4 in that level I had to shut down just to protect your sorry asses. Go take the AT-ATs. They're basically unkillable unless you're fighting up against snowspeeders. And I can guarantee you, the Empire doesn't have them. Seriously though, while some of the levels are really hard, they are a ton of fun, and there is a great amount of variance here. And what's neat is, some levels even have variance within themselves. For example, level 3 has you searching for a downed spaceship. That downed spaceship can be in one of about 5 different places. So no matter how many times you play it, it's going to be in a different spot. And while this does seem a little bit inconsistent, it does give you a slightly different experience every time, which is kinda cool. Now, it wouldn't be much of a spaceship flying game set in the Star Wars universe if it didn't have Star Wars spaceships to fly. You've got the X-Wing, you've got the underappreciated A-Wing, which was a complete bastard to ever shoot down in TIE Fighter. You've got the Snowspeeder, you've got the Y-Wing, you've got the Millennium Falcon, although it was resized to make more sense in a smaller fighting sim game. You've got the TIE Interceptor, you've got the V-Wing, which, seriously, why is this thing not in more games? Scramjet engines, rapid fire, it's got heat-seeking cluster missiles. Essentially, you shoot a missile out, it splits into like 10 missiles, and they all charge at different enemies. They are insanely powerful and way too much fun not to use once or twice. Or every time you possibly can. You've even got the Naboo Starfighter, and while I absolutely hate pretty much everything involved with Star Wars Episode 1, it was kinda interesting in this game, because this game came out about a year before Episode 1. And yet, no one discovered this code until well after Episode 1 was out in theaters. Which probably makes it one of the longest living codes in a game that no one ever found, next to maybe like the flamethrower in Zombies Ate My Neighbors. And while it is basically just a reskin for the X-Wing, it's still a neat little historical footnote that this existed as both a teaser to a movie that wasn't out yet, as well as one of the longest remaining unknown cheat codes. But that said, if you have a favorite Star Wars craft, chances are it's in here. Unless you're me, in which case your top 3 favorite Star Wars craft are the V-Wing, which is in here, the TIE Advanced, not the one you're thinking of, the one that's often referred to as the Avenger to try and avoid confusion, and the Star Wing, which you have to go play TIE Fighter to go get those 2 ships, and unfortunately, like the awesome V-Wing, aren't in anything else either. Seriously, world, why can't I have things I like? And even outside of the ships that you play as, there's tons of them. You've got the classic TIE Fighter, you've got the Interceptor, you've got the Bomber, you run into the probe droids, you've got 3 different walker types, including the AT-PTs for whatever reason, you've got tanks you have to shoot, you can go and shoot little stormtroopers on the ground, and seriously, if you want to make this game 2,000% more fun, you can just imagine each and every one of them being Jar Jar Binks. Because seriously, every Star Wars game needs a shoot Jar Jar in the face mode. And this kinda has it, if you play it my way. And every enemy you come up against feels like it flies in a completely different pattern than everything else. So it feels like every enemy is a legitimately different enemy, as opposed to, say, everything flying with the same AI but has a slightly different attack pattern. The only real complaint I have with the gameplay itself is that it doesn't feel like it supports high-speed aerial acrobatics all that much. For example, for whatever reason, you can't seem to roll or flip your machine, which means certain evasion tactics can't be used in this game, as opposed to other flight sims. This is partly why I don't like calling this game a flight sim. The other part being that, while you can get behind the actual camera in a sort of cockpit view, it feels like a weirdly pasted layer over top of the camera that's moving, but not in conjunction with the camera. It's a little hard to explain, but it doesn't really work. So I think that the camera actually works best in a third-person view in this game, which makes sense because that's the default. Although you can switch it to other ones, the weird thing being that while you can switch the camera, it won't ever remember that you've swapped it. So between levels, you might have to move the camera back to your desired position, which is a little annoying. But beyond that, this game is high-flying, high-speed, X-Wing based fun. The presentation is really well done. The only things about this game, presentation-wise, I don't really enjoy are really technical limitations. Like, occasionally I would see bits of terrain sort of warping around my ship, and really the only other thing is the draw distance, because there is a lot of fog of war in this game, which is a little unfortunate, but it doesn't hinder the gameplay in the least. And that's really the important thing. Audio presentation is tremendous. All the new songs sound like they'd fit in the Star Wars universe excellently. They've even got a few tracks from the actual movies, including Luke Skywalker's theme. All very iconic songs, all used to great effect. The voice acting in this game is relatively well done, very clearly not the movie actors reprising their roles here, but it feels like they're all acting their heart out, and it works excellently. The only complaint I have is one line in level 4, where 2 different characters are having a conversation with each other, but they're voiced by the same person, and he didn't switch his voice between the 2, so it sounds a little bit weird, like one character's just talking to himself. But aside from that, the voice acting is excellently done. And so we come to the end of my first Star Wars review. How about that? The sad thing is I only own like 2 more Star Wars games, on console anyway. And it's an excellent game if you have an N64 and you like Star Wars games, even if you don't. It's an excellent pickup, and it's a hell of a lot better than Shadows of the Empire. I hear this was also released on the PC, but I can't really speak to that version, as I've never played it. And at the end of the day, I think the Star Wars Rogue Squadron trilogy is sort of analogous to the original movie trilogy, in that the first one might not have been the best, but it did some bold things. It did some things that really stand out and still blows my mind today, which is partly why the game and the movie are still my favorites. The second one is the more openly accepted as the best one in the series and has the most following, and the third one did some really questionable things like adding Ewoks and making it mostly a third-person shooter that didn't work, that has me still scratching my head today asking why anyone would ever do this. But at the end of the day, Star Wars Rogue Squadron is excellent. Part of me feels really bad that Factor 5 has closed its doors, as we'll not see a remake of this, but then I remember they also made Lair, and I feel less bad about it. But if nothing else, I like this game. In fact, I like it so much I would probably give it my award for being the best console Star Wars game ever made. So Rogue Squadron is a must-have.